We were very lucky to have our two speakers today here with us, but they have other duties as well. They have to leave right after the panel. Let me just say something briefly about their bios, and I will take this first turn of introductions to raise my first question to each of them. So let me start with Francisco Gonzalez, the Executive Chairman of BBVA, who actually announced last week that you are stepping down by the end of the year after 18 years, very successful years at the forefront of the bank. Francisco Gonzalez has been an entrepreneur in many facets of his life. First founding FG, the brokerage company, which was afterwards sold to Merrill Lynch. Then he became the CEO at Argentaria, and afterwards the Chairman and CEO at BBVA. But the entrepreneurial verb has been around across your career in many different ways, and you have been committed to technology from the very start. So I was wondering, what is the reason of your passion for technology?
Let me remind you that I started my professional career as a programmer of IBM. The IBM 1401, you haven't heard of it, but it was the biggest commercial computer that we have.
It was the Watson of the time, the sort of
It was the
Watson
of the time, and the memory had 8K. 8K.
Wow.
And you can imagine how we programmed to have more throughput on the machine. So, and I've been working in the IT world for 15 years, more or less. Then I founded my company, and for the last 22 years, I've been working in banking, in commercial banking.
Wonderful.
So why your question?
My question was actually, which is very much embedded through your, throughout your career. I mean, your passion for technology was very visible at BBVA, where you piloted the digital transformation for the bank, right?
You know, technology allows a lot of things. First, to make the present things better. Second, to make things which were impossible before technology came up. So it's not very difficult to understand that in the commercial banking, when I became chairman and CEO of Argentaria in 1996, it wasn't very difficult to see that there were a lot of things to improve if you use correctly the technology. The banking system, the commercial banking system, generally speaking, was and it still is very inefficient. And the Spanish banking, by the way, was and it still is the best banking system in the world. But having said that, it is still very inefficient. So putting technology, both hardware and software, you know, matter a lot. So it's not very difficult to be determined to improve things using technology.
Let me now turn to John Reading, who's the CEO of the Financial Times Group. He was formerly the editor of the FT, the Financial Times in Asia. So you actually come from the editorial side, and afterwards you became the top manager at a leading, very famous media organization. You also piloted the transition into Nikkei from Pearson. So I was wondering, looking back at your career, as we say in Spanish, you were cocinero antes que fraile. You were a cook before becoming a monk. And I was wondering how important has been for your success as CEO, knowing the business in depth, having been a journalist yourself.
I think it's obviously important and valuable in any industry to have a range of experiences within the various departments. I think it's particularly important in news media and quality news media because we're big believers in church and state, editorial independence. I'm never quite sure which is church and which is state, but you have to be very clear that there is a very important distinction. So understanding that editorial independence when you're on the business side, I think is pretty fundamental. I think more generally with digital transformation and digital businesses, the ideas that departments can operate separately is history. I think that silos are over. You have to operate as a team, as an integrated business at the same time. You can't do things in sequence. You have to do things in parallel at the same time with a team. So I think therefore having worked on both sides of church and state and in some of the different departments makes it easier.
Let's jump into digital transformation and how technology has transformed the world of professions, which is very clear in the sectors that you both represent, in the financial services industry, as well as in media. In my own one, education, of course, we see the impact across all the different activities of the learning process. But thinking about the banking industry, Francisco, and I recall my interview 10 years ago, we did a case study on the BBVA, and afterwards I also interviewed you in Expo Management in front of also a mass audience. And you were very visionary. I recall that you were seeing yourselves, and I'm talking about more than 10 years ago, you were seeing BBVA competing with other companies like Google, which was not that obvious at the time, because banking is a very focused business. So I was wondering, what do you recall from that vision, and how many of your intuitions have been confirmed after the years?
And by the way, the Financial Times published that article back in the day, I think 10 or 9 years ago. It was a very famous article because for the first time a banker talked about innovation and Google's world. I would say that most of what we thought at that period of time has passed, has occurred, because the technology has improved a lot. Google and the giants of the net are bigger, much bigger than before, and the fintech world has exploded over time. What didn't happen is that for the time being, the banking system is still very resilient, and the inroads of those companies, I mean the giants of the net and the fintech, is not that big today, except in China, where Alibaba and Tencent have proved to be very successful getting inroads into the financial system. But the concept of turning the bank into a digital house, the digital house is there, and we are extremely convinced about that, and we have been pushing that concept over the last 10 years. Of course, we made a lot of mistakes, because one thing is the vision, the other thing is execution. And ideas, we have a lot of ideas. Ideas are spread all over the world, but execution is very, very difficult. It's very difficult because you have to work with people, human beings, and that is not easy at all. So we made some mistakes. The main mistake was to start that long digital transformation process, a journey without digital people. We started that road just with bankers, and bankers were very good as bankers, but not as engineers, as digital guys. So over time, we brought in a lot of engineers, physicists, and mathematicians, and now our management team is a mix of both bankers and engineers.
That's very interesting, because normally when you think about the profile of the typical banker, you associate the profile with being prudent, averse to risk.
Yeah.
So it's actually the opposite to being very innovative and entrepreneurial and technology driven, right?
I think you can be very conservative in terms of risk, but very innovative in terms of looking at the world. So I don't think a banker must be just a conservative. I think a banker must be an innovator today. Otherwise, you can't compete. You are not in the race.
I guess technology has also transformed deeply the media industry, and you, John, has piloted the actual transformation, digital transformation at the FT over the past years. The FT is actually one of those cases of success, of jumping into the digital world. One of the very few cases, no, if I may say. But if you think about the original business of media companies, which it was mainly based on the revenues coming from advertisement and subscriptions, how has it evolved over the past few years, and how do you envision, that revenues will continue happening in the future? Well, what will be the source, no, of the business in the future for your company?
Well, like Francisco, I get very excited by technology, but it has raised tremendous challenges to news media and a lot of problems. It's destroyed the traditional revenue base. Print advertising has been in steep decline for over a decade. It's created all sorts of new problems like fake news and abuse and mistrust of journalism. So while I really get excited by technology, I'm kind of aware of all of the challenges that it's presented. And some very famous news brands have simply gone out of business because they couldn't adapt. So, I'd like to say that we were totally visionary, but mainly necessity was the mother of invention. We had to change. We had to find new revenue sources. And that really meant developing this subscription model for journalism. At the time when we launched it back in 2006, 2007, people thought we were crazy. The view, particularly in the US, was you can't charge for information online. That's just wrong. But we did it, and it's turned out to give us very strong growth. So we're now approaching our 1 million paid-for subscriber level, which is higher than we've ever had in our 130-year history. So, and we can do that through mobile delivery, mobile technology. So I think the fundamental thing is you have to embrace the change. You have to, it won't go away, so you have to think, how do we turn it to our advantage? But it's been a pretty difficult road, and a lot of publishers have struggled with that because it's a very traditional industry. Moving from advertising to content revenues is tough. But I think that any news organization that wants to survive has to find a way of charging for journalism. Advertising alone will not support a quality newsroom. So that is a very big challenge to publishers.
Going back to the banking industry, which segment of banking you think will be most affected by technology? Will it be commercial banking, private banking? Because this has consequences for the professionals that work on those. And I recall that your bank, again, was very innovative in providing, ATM, cash machines, with lots of functions on the street, which probably affects, the way we understand today commercial banking, no? But which segment do you think?
In our case, we started with commercial banking. And probably commercial banking is the most, I would say, automated part of our, you can automate a lot of parts of the commercial banking system very soon in comparison with corporate investment banking and private banking. At the end of the day, every segment is affected by technology. So it's a question of time. Now we are very, very strong in the commercial part of our business. 50% of our customers in the retail banking system, retail banking work in digital, 50%. And the numbers, probably we will go back to those numbers later on, are really incredible. But corporate investment banking are changing dramatically because there are a lot of innovation out there. And in that case, we are bringing that innovation inside the bank. In the commercial bank, we innovate and we bring outside innovation. In the corporate investment banking and private banking, we acquire all the software, most of the solutions from outside. So there is no segment in the banking system which is not going to be affected by technology, as every sector.
But do you see the fintechs taking over a substantial portion of the whole business? I realize that your bank is investing importantly in startups and scale-ups that operate in that particular segment. Do you think that fintech will transform the landscape here?
When we started this digital process, let me remind you that in 1998 we launched an online banking. Unoe was the name. Sure. So we knew how that stuff worked. And it didn't work very well, frankly. So in 2005, 2006, we decided to start the transformation process from inside. And that, in my view, that was a very good idea and proved to be very successful. But at the same time, as you have mentioned, there's a new world in the making, made up of fintechs and those companies. So we also decided in 2011, 7 years ago, to set up a branch, a company in San Francisco, in order to scout the innovation, the innovation ecosystem. And that was a good decision because we were able to set up several vehicles in order to buy small stakes in startups or to buy out entire companies. So for us was a sort of having or buying options, open options, and we will see. Because, for example, we have we control 40% of Atom Bank, is a branchless bank in UK. That bank is going to control 5% of the mortgage market in UK very soon, 5% in a couple of years. And who knows? In 15 years, that bank can be far bigger than BBVA. Nobody knows how this ecosystem will evolve over time. So we have several bets. The main bet is BBVA, of course, but we have several options, spreading around.
That's amazing. I guess something similar is happening in the media industry, and the way you now deliver news or opinion differs very much from the way that happened just a few years ago. No? And you have launched a number of apps and tools that are, I guess, that they are actually taking over the traditional ways of using or consuming information. No? Could you share with us, some of these initiatives and maybe how you envision in the future? I guess you're also diversifying the FT to some extent in order to enter related areas to media. No? So I guess there are many analogies with the banking industry here, and you probably see the impact of technologies like blockchain, let's say, in news. No?
They suffered before us.
Well, I think you're right. I think digital technology does lead to a convergence of a lot of skills and disciplines. When I was a reporter, it was very easy. I just wrote the story for the newspaper, and that was it. Now they're doing video, audio, multimedia, so much more productive, much more challenging, and probably much more rewarding. Because you do have that direct relationship with the reader that you didn't have in print. So you can understand who's reading what, how long. So it's a much richer engagement with your audience. But I think it also gives us much more information around the sort of data analytics. And I didn't think when I was wanting to be a reporter that I had visions of being on the front line doing exciting reporting. I didn't think I'd get excited by data analytics. But actually, data analytics has really transformed our business. It gives us much more insight and intelligence into what people want when they want it. And it creates a much more engaged experience. So I think, to your question, the future is going to be a combination of increased personalization through understanding our audience, through data, but also that traditional role that any news organization should aspire to of setting the agenda and shaping what readers see and making the right priority decisions.
Actually, the management of big data in both cases at your respective companies has become a major source of potential business in the future. No? Currently, actually, most companies consider this field as a core, as a major area for developing competitive advantages in the future. No? So I wonder, are you taking steps actually in terms of developing entire areas to manage this particular field of big data and identify opportunities for business in the future?
Absolutely. I mean, we regard data as an asset that we have developed. We have a global readership of well-informed businessmen and businesswomen. Understanding through data becomes an asset. Obviously, we treat individual data incredibly carefully, as you must, but the aggregate data, I think, is very powerful. Both for our own purposes, but also for potential customers, understanding some of the trends, and obviously artificial intelligence can give us some insights into what happens with that data and those trends. So there's a whole range of business applications, both within the FT and for potential customers, that we're only beginning to identify.
Let me jump into the next topic that I wanted to raise at our panel that has to do with globalization. There's lots of challenges for global integration, at your respective sectors, but also at a political level, although I'm not going to raise, sensitive issues here. But I would like to ask you, about your vision about the future of globalization, which is somewhat under threat today. How do you see globalization in your industries, and what would be, the major threat for global integration? In the case of banking, I guess that regulation might be a potential threat, and I wonder what is your vision on regulation?
I think, technology is turning everything upside down, and is influencing not just the economic part of our lives, even our social part of our lives. And at the end, in my view, a new world is in the making, both social and economic. Completely different worlds in terms of how we relate, we socialize with our people, how we work, so. Everything is changing. But the legal architecture we have today doesn't cope with the new reality. So there's a big gap between the legal system and the reality. And as usually happens, regulators or policymakers lag behind. And that gap must be fulfilled or filled by someone, the regulators. And I think globalization, which in my view created a huge amount of wealth for the world as a whole, has created also some problems in specific sectors. But it's a big mistake blaming globalization in order to lose jobs, I don't know, in Iowa, in the States. Of course, you lose some jobs, but at the same time you create a lot of jobs. And unfortunately, Mr. Trump is there and is making mistakes every day, and there are other problems in the world. One of the reasons why Mr. Trump is there and other people are there is because of the social media, technology, which in some way gave those guys or gave those movements a big channel to make things happen in a completely wrong way, fake news and that stuff. The central point, in my view, is what I call the comparative disadvantages. So people know that there is a Ferrari in Roma, or there is a big house in New York, and the guy who is in Senegal, in Africa, wants to have that Ferrari. So he risks their life to come to Europe and so. And that is what's happening in the world. People have information, a lot of information. And that information is creating new ways of thinking, new ways of rewarding politicians which are really leveraging on that trend and to make things happen in their own way.
That's very interesting. And allow me to ask you a question before I address John, a particular question on social networks, and how you see the evolution of social networks and fake news. But I was wondering whether you are active on social networks, whether you publish pieces of news apart from your institutional communication with your stakeholders, whether you use Twitter or whether you think it's not the right way to communicate things, either from your personal life or from your professions.
So I think the danger for me is it gets very addictive. So I try not to spend too much time on it. From a business and industry and FT perspective, there are a couple of very important dimensions. On the one hand, the positive is that never before in history has it been possible to reach so many people so easily and so quickly. So Facebook has more followers than Christianity. And if you want to reach a big global audience, it's very easy. But we've always been very wary and very careful about how we interact with social media and the big search and tech platforms, because one of our key principles is that we must have a direct relationship with our readers. We need to understand them, they need to understand us. And as soon as you put your strategy on somebody else's platform and let them get between you and your audience, you're in danger. Google and Facebook can change their algorithm just like that, and they do. So earlier this year, Facebook demoted news in the news feed. Now, if you're a publisher that's bet the farm on advertising through Facebook, you've got a big problem. So we never did that. We made sure that we would always have our own independent strategy. So on the one hand, they're a very effective way of reaching people, but it's, you have to be careful not to get carried away with that. You have to stick to your principles of having that direct relationship. And at the same time, clearly, the very major crisis that we're seeing with fake news and poor quality information is a result of having these giant platforms which are optimized very intelligently to win the battle for attention, win the battle for time. They're brilliant at it. It's pretty unhealthy. So, you know, I think there are big dangers and risks in the rise of these networks.
Absolutely. Let me now turn to workers, professionals, managers, individuals, and how technology is actually transforming their environment. And let me ask a question to John, which has to do with the quality of your journalist pool of writers there, which is amazing. You are well known for the quality of your staff. How do you actually attract, you know, the best possible journalists and retain them in times when they can actually work as freelance or maybe jump into the social networks and develop a brand for themselves, no? What is the secret of that success?
I think there's probably two things, there's probably many more than two, but there's two that I would pick out. One, I think, is very much the mission, particularly at a time of fake news, of a crisis in politics and society and governance. Actually being involved in an organization, in a publication that really cares about accuracy, fairness, balance, truth. These are becoming unusual concepts, actually, in the world of information. So I think that does appeal to people, and I think that mission dimension is very important. Second, I would say variety. I think one of the wonderful things about the FT is, and I know from personal experience, you have many different roles. You don't have, you never get bored because after every 3 or 4 years you have a new posting or a new role or a new job. So I think that keeps people fresh and excited. So we're very focused on that movement of people within the FT.
As regards the BBVA, your company was actually ranked among the top organizations worldwide in terms of the best companies to work for, no? Which reveals actually the quality of your human resources practices. So what is the reason for achieving, you know, that position? And I realize that you have paid lots of attention to people.
If you want to turn a digital bank, a bank into a digital house and to compete globally, you have to be excellent at every level. And of course, people is the most important part of our businesses. So when we started this journey, we didn't work just with the platforms, the IT platforms, the software platforms, and many things, but with people and premises as well. So we decided to have premises which cope with that concept. Our premises are open spaces. We don't have hierarchies. The composition system changed dramatically. At the end of the day, we were creating some sort of ecosystem where people felt better. And now, as John mentioned, our people feel that they are part of a mission, which is changing the banking system worldwide, globally. So you need to create some sort of critical mass in order to attract the best talented. And when some people leaves, generally speaking, leaves BBVA, he gets at least 3-4 times more money than they get in BBVA, because they know that being part of the ecosystem is part of their professional career. So we change many things in order to have the best software, the best practices, no hierarchies at all, you know, different compensation, creating some sort of cities where people live very well. It's a very complex task, but it works very well.
Let me raise my final round of questions, no? And I'll start with John. How do you envision executive training and development in the future, given the importance of people for your organizations? What is the weight of these very important part of management.
Yeah, so I guess again there's two things that I would mention, there's probably more than two, but I think relevance is crucial. I think the days of dated case studies are over. I think people should have access to, and we can generate that real-time, learning and education. That's obviously what we're doing with the Corporate Learning Alliance, to make it real, because things are moving very, very quickly. So I think the days when you could go to business school and then have a career and not follow up with further education is over. Everything's changing very quickly, so you need to stay current. And you need to understand the changes going on increasingly quickly. And I think the second point is really about outcomes. I think that people enjoy education and get much more from it when they can measure the progress they're making. And I think that having abilities, again, made more easily through digital technology, enable people to see the progress they're making in learning a particular skill or development. And I think it makes it much more engaging.
And regarding BBVA and your experience, Francisco, what is the relation between attracting talent and being able to transform a company? Because sometimes you may hire, very talented people, but you know that you may encounter also lots of divos or divas.
This is an art. This is an art. You can read a lot of books, and you can talk to many people, but if you don't have the art and the managerial skills to do so, it's impossible. So, in turning a bank into a company and coming to a newcomer, the first thing is to understand that people don't want to change. That's the first rule. So you can have the best project, the best idea, but people will say, well, they will say yes, but they will push back. They will act as stoppers. This is the first rule. So the only way is just to start to change is to introduce some pieces from outside and to persevere, of course, and to be very determined to advance. But you have to pay a lot of attention to your people. And if you don't have the best people, at least at the first levels, it's impossible to advance. And according to my experience, I had to share a couple of management teams during these years until I got the right team. So, by the way, I am able to retire because I have the right team, and I am very happy in that regard, because otherwise I would have been here for a little while, a little more time. So having the more talented and excellent people is a must. If you don't, forget it.
Well, thanks very much. I'm very obedient, and we are actually reaching time. So please join me in a big round of applause to our two speakers today, Francisco Gonzalez and John Reading.
Thank you.